From the roaring crowds of gladiatorial arenas to the subtle strategies of chessboards and the delicate brushstrokes of a masterpiece, entertainment shapes how we see the world and how the world sees us. But what if your world isn't like ours? What if the games, the arts, and the performances told stories only possible in a fantasy realm? What kind of cultural expression would your cultures in your world have? That's what this podcast is about. Cultural expression and entertainment through sports, arts, and games for a fantasy culture. Welcome to another episode of Worldbuilding Blueprints from Just-in-Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you're watching this on YouTube, there is a playlist where you can watch the previous episodes in the information card. If you're listening to this in a podcast app, the previous episodes are available there. As always, this episode is brought to you by the wonderful members of my YouTube channel who make this entire endeavor worthwhile. There are details on how to join their magnificent ranks and the perks you can get in the links down below. Cultural expression is the outward manifestation of a society's core values, beliefs, and identity. It encompasses everything from the performing arts and visual arts to rituals, sports, and games. These forms of expression are not only ways for individuals to entertain and create, but also provide insight into the deeper cultural norms, mores, and values of a society. In the first section of this podcast, we will explore the role of cultural expression using the performing arts. Performing arts are a vivid and dynamic way in which cultures share their stories, histories, and values. Whether it is through songs, storytelling, elaborate performances, or even TV shows and movies, the performing arts serve as both entertainment and a powerful tool for shaping social identity and community cohesion. In addition, the performing arts can be used as a tool to impart history or plot elements to characters and readers alike. For example, music like The Reigns of Castamere in A Song of Ice and Fire conveys significant historical information about the Lannisters and their ruthless rule. Similarly, songs or plays in your world could teach lore, recount great battles, or serve as allegories for contemporary political events. There are a number of ways to include performing arts in a culture depending on their technology and the sapient species' attributes and what your story needs. So your options include primary musical performance. In the traditional fantasy setting, this would be the role of the bard, the young lear, or the minstrel. These roles include the transmission of lore and history in oral societies. The distinction between the various roles in this large grouping can also add additional layers to your culture. For example, a society that venerates bards as sacred storytellers, such as in Catherine Kerr's Devery series, might treat the performances of bards as untouchable acts and hold bards up to a high pedestal as performers who are more than just musicians. They are sacred in their own right. On the other hand, young lears and minstrels might be seen as mere transient entertainers and might not have the same level of protection as an actual bard. Moving on from primary musical performance, you might also have primary storytelling as a type of performing art in your culture. Some cultures may favor verbal storytellers over musical performers. These storytellers often embody the characters they speak out loud, acting out epics and creating immersive narratives. Group performances, such as theatre troupes or even TV shows, could be both entertainment and a way to share news, as seen in the Game of Thrones TV show, where Arya sees a play of the events at King's Landing while she is living on the streets of Bravos. And besides storytelling and music, you can also have in the performing arts category the primary physical performances. This performing art type includes dancing or even physical arts like mimes and clowns. On the topic of dancing, it's worth noting that there are two forms of dancing in most cultures. One is performed by normal people during festivals and parties, covering all sorts of dances from maypole dancing to square dances to the waltz. The other is dancing as part of professional entertainment and perhaps even storytelling. For example, ballet dancing, Spanish dancing, acrobatics, or even pole dancing, depending on the prude level of your culture. And don't forget that all of this can also exist in a modern world if your culture has access to TV or even radio. Don't forget to take into consideration how these performing arts translate into those media and the impact of celebrities that this would create to the wider culture. So, when creating your own performing arts for your culture, consider the following questions. What type of art is it and what does it look like? Are any props or instruments required? Don't forget to think about magic and fantasy elements here. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Butterfly Kingdom, for example, have a dance where they fly as part of the dance, making it literally an airborne ballet, which sounds truly amazing. Then consider, why does this culture have this performing art? Did it originate within this culture due to some kind of environmental or fantastical condition? Or perhaps it is an art form adopted from another culture. Consider ballet, which originated in Italy during the Renaissance as an outgrowth of Italian court pageantry. But these days, ballet is everywhere, from Japan to Argentina, and of course all over Europe. It spread like wildfire across Europe and was exported to the rest of the world via colonization. So, consider how your performing art developed and if it's shared between multiple cultures or not. Also consider how performers are treated by other people of the culture. Are they celebrated, denigrated? Is it seen as a great career choice? Do you need a patron to succeed? Also think about what is depicted by the performing art. Is there a song about an historical event? Are there dances that illustrate some cultural values? Have there been specific patrons who skewed the art in order to match their politics, like the relationship between Elizabeth I and Shakespeare, which resulted in Richard III getting vilified in the play of the same name? And of course, if you do need help designing your cultural values, check out the earlier episode of that topic in this podcast. What's the most epic performing art you've encountered in a fantasy world? Or have you built an amazing performing art incorporating your fantastical elements? Let me know in the comments or by sending this podcast fan mail, and let's dance right along to fine arts. Besides performing arts, world builders should also consider fine arts such as painting, sculptures, textiles, or perhaps some form of fantastical art creation. This kind of art not only decorates, but can serve as a historical record or a non-verbal communication method. Tapestries, murals, and even pottery can depict significant events, victories in battle, or mythological tales that define a culture's history and its heroes. In addition, art can be incorporated into the sigils of noble houses and communicate rank and family lines. For example, in my world of Sangwheel Chronicles, a noble's heraldic sash is in many ways a work of art, featuring the symbols of house and rank and magic. A very rich noble might have gems incorporated into the depiction of the heraldic symbology, while a poor chevalier might need to settle for silk or cotton dyed in as many colors as they can afford. An important consideration when creating fine art in your culture is patronage. Art patronage historically was a significant part of many cultures, and it can reflect not only the tastes of the society's elite, but also its politics, power struggles, and social hierarchies. The dynamic between patrons and artists influences how art is produced and consumed. We can see this in Renaissance Italy or through the Medici family's impact on Florence, where wealthy patrons often dictated the themes and messages of art. In your world, consider how rulers or religious leaders might commission works that glorify their reign or legitimize their rule. For instance, a ruler might demand portraits or tapestries that depict them in a divine light, similar to the stylized representations of Queen Elizabeth I, where she borrowed iconography from the Virgin Mary to cement her image. If you want to go into deeper detail into the relationship between artists and patrons, on the Just in Time Worlds channel, I do have a video that delves into exactly that topic, which I will link in the comments down below. As mentioned earlier, this kind of patronage can also influence the performing arts, like with Shakespeare, but performing artists can build a wider audience to support their art and thus are not always as closely tied to a patron. Fine artists need someone to pay for the creation of their art, and this almost always ties them to someone with money to buy them food and tools. It is worth noting that religious organizations are often the patrons of the arts, and thus religious rituals and symbols often permeate both fine and performing arts. A culture's connection to its deities or belief system can shape everything from the architecture of its temples to the music played during sacred rites. And we'll explore that topic in more detail in the episodes dedicated to religion and world building, which will come in the future. When you are designing fine arts in your world, consider the following. What does the art look like? Does it require any fantastical elements? For example, a science fiction setting might have hologram design as an art form, or in a fantasy setting where you have a magic system that involves weaving, you might have cloth woven from moonbeams to create a fantastical tapestry of immense beauty as an art form. Are there notable examples of this art in your culture? What does that art depict? And importantly, who paid for the art? And how does the depiction vary from reality due to that patronage? How are artists treated by the rest of the culture? Are they celebrated? Or are they seen as bootlickers of the wealthy? How does this art express the values of the culture? So that's a quick overview of creating art for your culture. But art, performing or fine, is not the only way a culture expresses itself. So let's leave the delicate flowers of culture behind and talk about sport. Sports in any world are often a reflection of the core values and ideals that a culture holds dear. For instance, a society that esteems cooperation might favor team-based sports, while one that glorifies individual achievement would likely focus on solo sports. Depending on the resources and technology available, sports can focus on physical exertion or incorporate magical elements similar to Quidditch in the Harry Potter series. A culture steeped in magic might have sports where the manipulation of elemental forces is key to success, while more grounded societies may prefer sports centered on skill and endurance. Sports can also provide a safe outlet for conflict between groups or nations. Historical events like the Olympics or gladiatorial games serve as prime examples of non-lethal competition standing in for war, though obviously not all gladiatorial bouts were non-lethal. In a world where open war may be discouraged by some magical act or by the influence of the gods or something equivalent, major conflicts might be settled through sports, and entire societies may revolve around rivalries that arise from such contests. In addition, sports are often closely tied to rituals, particularly coming of age ceremonies. In a seafaring society, for instance, young adults might be required to prove their worth by competing in a dangerous solo voyage. The winner might be granted the title of First Sailor, marking them as a future leader or captain in this culture. These sports take on symbolic significance, reflecting the deep connection between the society's way of life and their cultural expression through physical feats. When creating a sport in your world, consider the following. What actually is the sport? Is it land-based, air-based, water-based, or something else? Is it physical, magical, or a combination of the two? What does the field look like? What are the rules and what are the team sizes? Is there any special equipment required for the sport? How are the players of the sport treated by the culture? Has the sport had historical moments of great impact? Here I am reminded of the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa. It was the first World Cup that South Africa could participate in after the fall of apartheid, and the country was in a very disunited state, teetering on the edge of falling apart. The victory by the rugby team, combined with their activities off the field in embracing a multicultural South Africa, served as a unifying moment in a very critical time. If you want to see a dramatized version of this time in South Africa's history, speaking of performing arts, check out the movie Invictus, which I highly recommend as a great movie. But back to sport design. Like with art, you also want to consider if the sport is homegrown or imported. The aforementioned rugby, for example, is a colonial export of Britain to its colonies. Has a sport played a role in your fantasy world? What is the most epic sporting moment in the real world that you remember? But maybe you're not a sporty person. You're not stuck with just sport, right? I mean, what about the brainiacs in the culture? Those interested in games where you don't need as much physicality. Let's talk about that next. Board games and strategy games are not merely pastimes, they are training grounds for minds, particularly in societies where leadership, military command, or complex political maneuvering is key. Strategy games like chess or Go are often used to develop tactical thinking in future leaders. In some cultures, young nobles may be required to excel in a specific game to prove their readiness for leadership. Such games may be part of military training, with generals and captains learning to outwit their opponents, not just in war, but also on the board. Strategy games may also be tied to religious or cultural rituals. For example, in a world with a deity of war or luck, a key strategy game could be played as part of a ritual to win the favor of the gods before a battle. The game itself might reflect the values of patience, foresight, and sacrifice, with characters learning vital life lessons through play. Over time, these games become embedded in the language and culture of a society. Phrases like sacrificing pawns or watch your king from chess show how deeply games can influence everyday speech and thought. In your world, a game with specific magical rules, such as requiring the manipulation of magical elements or influencing the outcome through spells, could lead to expressions about luck and power rooted in the game's dynamics. So when creating strategy games and board games, consider the following. How many players are involved? Bear in mind, solitaire games are an option here. What does the board and game pieces look like, and how does the game work? Does it involve any random elements? For example, the dice rolls of Warhammer 40k introduce a random element to an otherwise deck-building and strategic wargame. Is magic or other fantasy elements involved in this game at all? Again, consider the impact of the game on culture. Has a hero of the culture ever averted the war with this game? Maybe someone has beaten death at a game of chess in the legends of yore. And of course, does this game come from elsewhere, or did it originate within the culture? And for our last form of cultural expression, let's talk about games of gambling and luck. Gambling and games of luck can be more than just entertainment. They often reveal the moral fabric of a culture. Whether betting on the outcome of a dice roll or wagering an entire fortune on a high-stakes card game, the way societies approach gambling can offer insight into their relationships with risk, wealth, and power. Some cultures might strictly regulate or even outlaw gambling, relegating it to secret dens or high-class establishment where the rules of society are temporarily suspended. Others might embrace gambling as a vital part of their culture, where fate and fortune are central to the world's philosophy and risk-taking behavior is embraced. For example, a culture that worships a god of luck might believe that gambling is a divine test of one's worth, with high stakes leading to either fortune or divine punishment. In fantasy worlds, gambling could be entwined with the supernatural. Perhaps there is a game where one wagers not just wealth, but years of life or service to a god, much like in the example of winning or losing to a god of luck. The stakes in such games could range from trivial to life-altering, adding tension and excitement to your narrative. Gambling metaphors can also become ingrained in the language, with phrases like rolling the dice or calling someone's bluff, reflecting societal values around risk and honesty. A society that places a high emphasis on fate might develop idioms like leaving it to the gods or fate's dice have rolled. In some worlds, magical or enchanted dice might be central to the culture's belief system, with legendary stories of great gamblers that shaped the course of history. When creating a gambling game, consider the following. Of course, how it works, including whatever board, game pieces, and so on are required. This can be as simple as a pair of dice or as complex as a backgammon board. Consider magic and fantasy and its impact, especially with a view to manipulating the luck part of the game, such as the way dice rolls or the potential use for something like a foresight skill. Also bear in mind that in some cultures, risk-taking is seen as a bad thing, and gambling might be restricted to certain areas or times, and that can also illustrate how the culture feels about luck and about taking high risks, which further ties into the norms of the culture. What's the coolest idiom that refers back to a game, fantasy or real world that you know? Let me know in the comments or by sending this podcast fan mail. Cultural expression isn't just the stories a society tells, it's the way it tells those stories. Through art, sport, games, and performance, you can weave the values, history, and identity of your culture into something tangible, something your readers or players can truly feel and experience in your world. So don't neglect that cultural expression when you are creating your culture. It will add unexpected depth and give you all kinds of cool expressions that your characters can use to boot. Now, not next month, because next month the podcast is on break, but the month afterwards, we'll put together all of the pieces of cultural world building into one comprehensive model before we move on to discuss religion and then economics. So if you're interested in those topics, make sure you subscribe to get those episodes when they drop. A very huge thanks to my members for sponsoring this podcast, and a special shout out to Tony and Katie as members of Build It in Stone, and Dylan, Tiffany, Aya, and Patricio as members of Build It and Wood. All members not only get early access to my videos, but also get access to the worksheets that accompanies this podcast. You, dear listener, can join their ranks for as little as a cup of coffee a month and also unlock all these perks. But don't feel pressured. You can also support me just by sharing this podcast around. And on that note, I will see you soon for another episode. Remember, build what you need, when you need it, and happy world building.